Chapter 29. Flying Lessons. Reyes woke to a very dark hut and the sounds of birdsong. He could see nothing. The oil lamp had burnt itself out sometime during the night, and the only light in evidence was a few specks of the early morning sunlight trying to shove their way between the twigs and the dried grass that made up the hut. Where was he? Reyes had a weird feeling that there was a harpy lying beside him. He wasn't sure why he should think it was a harpy. Then slowly his memory of the last few hours came back to him. Her name was Gagara, and yes, she was a harpy. But that was okay, because he was also a harpy. There was just enough room in the hut for the two to sleep side by side without touching. Gagara, though, had kept close to him throughout the night, and even now one of her arms straddled his midriff, almost as if to ensure that he couldn't go anywhere without her knowing about it. Reyes sighed happily and snuggled a little closer to her. The way she was holding him made it virtually impossible for him to move without disturbing her, and so he decided just to enjoy the proximity of his new girlfriend. His body was a mass of bite and claw marks, and some of them still hurt quite a bit. She had made him bleed last night. He had no doubt that Gagara was suffering from similar marks all over her body where he had bitten and clawed her. Reyes stroked the arm that was holding him. He was content to just lie there in her arms. His feet were still hurting from all the walking he had done yesterday, and his legs were feeling quite stiff, so he really didn't want to move until he had to. I really do think I'm in love, Reyes commented more to himself than anything. Gagara agreed happily in her sleep. Reyes must have laid there for an hour, maybe even two, just enjoying the sound of Gagara's breathing and the touch of her hand on his waist. Eventually, though, Reyes could wait no longer. He'd have loved to lie there next to Gagara all day, but his bladder had other ideas, and it was a long climb to the top of that wall. Reyes stopped stroking Gagara's arm. He took hold of her hand gently, thumb and forefinger, and being careful not to wake her, moved the hand from his body. Ideally, he'd like to leave and return without her even noticing. Slowly, Reyes climbed to his feet. Once again his wings brushed the roof of the hut as he stood. It was a bit of a shock to find out just how low the ceiling of the hut was. It caused Reyes to lose his balance for a second. Instinctively his foot jutted out to support him, and so to stop him from falling over. That foot landed right on Gagara's left wing. Ouch! Gagara screamed. She woke up suddenly, and grabbing hold of Reyes' leg, she all but pulled him over on top of her. Who? It's me, Reyes replied worriedly. Oh, handsome, Gagara replied more contentedly, feeling his face with her hand. I thought I had an intruder. I trod on your wing, Reyes replied apologetically, getting back to his feet. Sorry, I can't see a thing in here. Gagara began to climb to her feet as well. What are you doing? Reyes hesitated for a second. I need to visit the top of the wall. Oh, I see, Gagara commented, giggling. Should I come up with you? Make sure you're safe? As much as Reyes loved Gagara, he really didn't want her to be there watching while he did his business. You can't be with me all the time, love, he told her. Besides, the eyes in the sky will keep me safe. I am yours, Gagara said cryptically. Then, without another word, she ducked out through the door and into the open air of Harpy Town. For a moment, Reyes wondered if what he had said had upset her in some way. Then he followed. Gagara was waiting for him just outside the hut. It was chilly out here. There was a cool breeze that couldn't be felt in the hut that was giving everything a chill. It wasn't winter yet, but it felt as if the breeze was foreshadowing even worse weather to come. The second he stepped out from the hut, he felt as if unsympathetic eyes were watching him from every angle conceivable. He tried to ignore his feelings as best he could. He was here now, and if I didn't like it, they were going to have to put up with it. Breakfast first, Gagara suggested insistently. Definitely, Reyes agreed. He would have to admit he was feeling hungry. As soon as I get back from the wall. Hello, you snide bat, Henfin greeted. Reyes had returned and with Gagara had gone to the fire pit for breakfast. Everything was pretty much the same as it had been the previous evening. The three elderly harpies supervising the fire pit seemed to be the same three Reyes had seen here on his last visit. The young girls assisting in cooking had changed, but there were so many of them that Reyes hadn't bothered to memorize their faces. Again, the girls seemed to look at him and giggle. One of them even stopped turning the spit she had been operated and approached Reyes as if fascinated by the spectacle of a male. Reyes was no longer feeling quite so self-conscious about being naked, nor did he feel quite so aroused by all the naked females that stood nearby. It was as if the presence of so much nakedness had in some way diffused its value. "Hello, you ugly old trout," Gagara replied. She seemed unaware of the attention Reyes was getting as she grabbed 2 chunks of meat from one of the spits. Henfin grinned. She indicated some of the bite marks that covered Gagara's body. "You irksome little whore. Well, I can see you two had a good time last night." Reyes felt his body freeze with the comment. He was only 6.5 years old. Surely the older harpies would think that they were too young for the things they'd been doing last night. Reyes half expected to hear a long lecture of the type his father might have given him. "A very good time," Gagara replied happily. There was no sense in her voice that Gagara was in any way shy about what had happened. Gagara's forthrightness was more than a little disturbing for Reyes. He leaned forward. "What if your mother should hear?" he asked her worriedly. Actually, he was thinking more about what if his mother should hear. "She'd be overjoyed," Gagara replied, a puzzled look on her face. Reyes nodded reluctantly. After the conversation he'd had with Gagara's mother yesterday, he could well believe it. "Come on, handsome. Let's go find ourselves a suitable tower." "A tower?" Reyes protested as he bit into his chunk of meat. "If I'm going to teach you to fly, then really we need the use of a tower," Gagara explained to him. "Learning to fly." Reyes would love to know how to fly, but he wasn't sure his wings were ready yet. Besides, he had only just gotten up and he had other things on his mind. "I could use a wash first. Where's the nearest water?" "A wash?" Gagara seemed a little startled. "Well, I suppose there's a well about 1/4 mile from here, but we don't like to use it. The elves sometimes put nasty things in the water. There's a river about 1.5 to 2 miles just outside town. If you're thirsty, we could probably find a little in the community somewhere, or I can go and fetch a little later. As for washing, well, if you really must, you can wash when we get to the river. We'll visit the river once you've learnt to fly." Reyes shivered at the thought of bathing in a river. The river was a little too similar to the moat at the castle. The mere idea of voluntarily stepping into the river scared him. Besides, from the tone of her voice, Reyes got the feeling that harpies weren't all that into the whole cleanliness thing, and he really didn't want to look too much out of place. "I think I'll pass." Reyes followed Gagara as she weaved the path between the huts of the town. As they walked, they ate. Gagara was constantly making small noises of enjoyment with almost every bite, and didn't really seem to be looking where she was going. As they walked, Reyes tried to flap his wings, preparing them for the lesson. Whatever the problem had been with his wings, he seemed to be able to feel them now, and could move them if he concentrated. Whether or not he would be able to flap them fast enough to be able to fly before the day ended was another matter. There were 3 towers in that part of Harpy Town. The towers were tall, not tall enough to look beyond the wall that marked the boundaries of Harpy Town, but they gave a commanding view of the entire area. Gagara seemed to have one particular tower in mind. Reyes assumed it was the one that she would usually choose when perching up there alone. As they approached, Reyes could see that the tower already had an occupant. The harpy in question saw Gagara approach. She launched herself from the top of the tower and flew right past them at a very low height, causing Reyes to duck instinctively. She then flew back the other way and made a graceful landing on the top bar of the doorway of the nearest hut. Reyes stared amazed that the doorway could even take the weight it was suddenly being subjected to. He could hear the bar creaking under the extra weight, and half expected the whole structure to collapse under the pressure at any moment. "Hello, Tifneg," Gagara greeted. "Hello," Tifneg replied in a jaunty tone. "Who's your new friend? Would you be willing to lend her to me one of these nights? I could use a little bit of warmth, especially with winter coming in." "No," Reyes said firmly, "she wouldn't." "Oh," Tifneg responded, "such sharpness, such feeling. I could have fun with her. No biting, I promise. I'm only looking for a good time, not a lifelong commitment." "Lifelong commitment?" Reyes repeated the words slowly, defining their exact meaning. "Maybe another time," Gagara promised. "She's still settling in." Fair enough, Tifneg commented, but I shall hold you to your promise. Gagara! Reyes tried to protest. Gagara looked innocently at Reyes and then said to Tifneg, Are you finished with the tower, and can we use it? Sure, Tifneg replied. It's too cold up there anyway. She took to the air and said, Have fun, you two. She flew past them again at the same low height she had before, and again caused Reyes to duck as she teasingly swatted her tail at him. Then she flew back towards them. Oh, I forgot to mention, I just saw an elf enter the town. An elf? By the tone of her voice, Reyes could tell that Gagara was worried by this news. He was alone, Tifneg revealed. She flew back overhead again and said reassuringly, Don't worry. I don't think he was a tax collector or an assessor. He wasn't dressed like one. Gagara breathed a strong sigh of relief. Thank Lammerwalt for that. Tifneg flew off to the south over Reyes and Gagara's heads again. This time she didn't come back. What was that about biting? Reyes asked. You didn't know? Gagara commented, surprised. Surely you know. I mean, what about last night? Reyes shook his head. He was beginning to feel strongly as if this was something he should know. Gagara sounded puzzled as she told him, You know, sex is meaningless, but when the male bites the female, she makes a claim. Really? Reyes replied. And if the female bites the male? He remembered that Gagara was the one who had started the whole biting thing. No, Gagara said. The female does that just to encourage the male to start biting. It's not binding until the male does it. Then, if the female does it back, it means she's accepting the claim. So, you and I are mated? Reyes commented. He was sure he felt love for Gagara, but he had only just met her yesterday and wasn't sure he was ready for such a long-term commitment. We are a pair? A couple? Married even? Not really. Not like that, Gagara said to him. I am yours, yes. But you are not limited to just me. For a moment, Reyes felt as if this was excellent news. He could surround himself with lovely girls, and it would all seem normal, even expected. Slowly, though, he realized that his love for Gagara, as recent as it was already so strong that he didn't want to spoil it by diluting it with anyone else. She was the only one for him. Come on, Gagara said, changing the subject. She flew to the top of the now vacant tower and peered down at him. Time you learnt to fly. Then maybe we can visit the arena and see who is fighting. I hope it's Skeeg. I like Skeeg. The arena, Reyes commented. Harpy's getting free, Gagara commented. Really? Reyes was surprised they would let harpies in free, unless everyone could get in free. Sure, Gagara called back. We just fly over the walls. We don't need to pass through the ticket booths. Then, concentrating on the matter at hand, she said, Okay, come on up. Come up, Reyes replied worriedly. The design of the tower didn't really offer itself to climbing. How? You fly up, she said calmly. Or you try to. I don't expect you to actually make it up here on your first attempt. I'll be sitting up here, so I can observe as you get the hang of your wings. Reyes stood there dumbfounded. That's it? That's how you teach someone to fly? Well, Gagara confessed, I've never actually taught anyone before. I can't remember how my mother taught me, but still, how hard can it be? Reyes flapped his wings twice. It felt good to know his wings were reacting to his desires now, but they moved too slowly. It was something that Gagara was quick to point out to him. You need to flap your wings quite a bit faster. I can't do it, Reyes told her. Yes, you can, Gagara called back. Give it time. Reyes tried to increase the pace at which he flapped his wings. It was hard for him to get them to go faster. It wasn't as if his wings were tiring. It was simply a case that he couldn't get any speed. Gagara tipped her head to one side. Is there something wrong with your wings? Inexperience, Reyes replied. I might need a few days to get it. Gagara shook her head. It's more than that, isn't it? She launched herself from the tower and landed next to him. I'll admit, I was surprised when you said you couldn't fly, but I just assumed that you must have been chucked out of your village as a baby for being born male. It's probably lucky that you survived at all, and there would have been no one in the wilds to teach you to fly, and since you had no girls with you, I assume that you probably hadn't met a harpy before you entered the city. Not exactly, Reyes confessed. Oh? Gagara commented. She rested against one of the poles of the tower and waited for his explanation. Reyes sighed. He was scared to tell her the truth. He decided he would have to embellish things a bit. I don't remember my parents. Maybe I was kicked out as a baby for being male. I don't remember that far back. However, I was brought up by humans in Florif. Humans, Gagara spat out the word. They kept me as a pet, Reyes added quickly. I guess they treated me fairly well, but they weren't about to teach me how to fly. After all, I might use the knowledge to escape. Oh, Tanrag, Gagara said with feeling. I learned what I know of our language from another harpy they had prisoner, a female, and yes, I did have feelings for her, although she was nearly 20 years older than I, but then she was the only other member of my race I'd ever seen. That's why you have trouble keeping up sometimes, Gagara volunteered. Harpy isn't actually your first language. It isn't, Reyes agreed. When I finally did escape, I had to do so on foot. He considered saying more, but felt that the shorter he kept his story, the less likely it was that Gagara would be able to poke any holes in it. I'm sorry, Gagara said. I'm glad you have some feeling in your wings at least. I guess we'll take it slowly. Besides, I'm sure I'd be doing more than just egging you on. Maybe I can talk my mother into helping, when she has a spare day. We're giving up then? Reyes asked. For now, Gagara replied. I'm getting hungry again. Reyes grinned. Me too. Let's go back to your hut. Gagara obviously got his meaning because she laughed. You're insatiable. Maybe later, but I need something to eat first. It wasn't far from the tower back to the fire pit. Gagara could fly there in less than a minute, but she kept close by to Reyes as he walked his way through the huts, only too aware of the looks he was getting from the girls who were busy at various tasks in this part of the town. One harpy in particular seemed to be hard at work turning a thick strip of leather into a skirt. Reyes considered stopping there for a moment and asking the harpy if she could make one for him. That was when the elf that Tifneg had reported to them stepped round one of the nearby huts. The elf was dressed in a yellow and green uniform identical to some of those that Reyes had seen patrolling the streets of the city on the previous day. The elf himself seemed quite surprised at having come virtually face to face with a harpy on the ground. At least she's not wearing the orange and red of the tax collection agency, the girl making the skirt commented. Agreed, Gagara replied. The elf was armed with a short sword, but he made no effort to unsheath his blade. He was in a part of the city surrounded by potentially hostile harpies, and there was no hint of any blue glow over his head, no telltale sign of an eye in the sky, yet the elf seemed totally at ease. Is tax a big problem? Reyes asked. He felt silly for even contemplating the question, let alone asking it. They keep putting it up, Gagara said bitterly. To pay for the war, they say. My mother joined the Hope so I could continue to afford to live here. She has yet to receive a single rise in wage to counter the extra tax. These tax rises only ever seem to affect our part of Harpy Town. I think they want to evict us to make room for more harpies willing to fight in their war. If the tax goes up much more, I'll have to leave regardless. Am I interrupting? The elf asked. He stepped forward cautiously. Gagara stepped in front of Reyes and in crisp Elistran said, What do you want? The elf pretty much ignored her. Well, he did glance at her once, and then he looked over her shoulder, his attention fully on Reyes. Reyes felt a strong feeling of danger. Had he been found out? His hand dropped to where his sword usually was, only to realise that he had left it behind in the hut. No, look, he blurted out. It was a struggle as he tried to find the right words, certain that in his panic he was making little or no sense. What you want? That horse, good quality, I sell. Gagara gave Reyes a funny look and tilted her head to the side. Guess I need to teach you Elvish too. Horse? The elf repeated, seeming confused. What tapping horse? Reyes felt as if he was cornered. Have you been in the tapping city long? The elf asked. His entire attitude seemed to be one of superiority over the two harpies. They might be many times stronger and more capable warriors than he, but from the way he acted it was easy to believe that he thought the reverse was true. Reyes shrugged his shoulders. He barely understood the question. In the end, he had to turn to Gagara for help. He arrived yesterday, Gagara told the elf. She looked ready to attack. She had already unsheathed her claws, and didn't look as if she was about to let the elf go round her. The elf looked at Gagara for a moment, and then at Reyes. Doubt seemed to enter his expression. "Did you arrive with him?" "No," Gagara replied tersely. "I've always lived here. Now, what do you want?" "Him," the elf said calmly. "You can't have him," Gagara responded angrily. "He's mine." "Just the tuppin talk to," the elf said calmly. "Tell him I'll meet him at noon in Tapster's Alley next to the Tuppin Inn. Tell him to come alone. I don't want any Tuppin one else, even in Tuppin hearing range, and I'm well aware of the superior hearing you Tuppin harpies have." Reyes looked at the man blankly until Gagara relayed the message. "He wants to talk to me in private," Reyes said to Gagara, "but I can barely understand a word he says. I'll need an interpreter." Gagara relayed that message back to the elf. The elf smiled and shook his head. "He comes a Tuppin lone." Then he turned to Reyes and spoke 3 words of flourish, making it clear from his expression that he knew Reyes understood the language. "We will manage." He didn't seem to care that Gagara or the harpy working with the skirt might overhear him. "What?" Gagara said, not understanding. The elf didn't say another word. He just returned the way he had come. Reyes rested an arm on Gagara's shoulder. "I guess I have an appointment at noon. Will you be alright alone for an hour or two?" "You trust him?" Gagara looked doubtful. "Not even slightly," Reyes replied. Actually, he had a fairly good idea who this elf might be, but he daren't tell that to Gagara. "If I'm not careful, I suspect I might find myself signed up for some sort of suicide mission." He struck a dramatic pose, which he fully realised he was doing just for her benefit. "You know the sort of thing. Invade the goblin tribe lands single-handedly." Gagara rewarded him with a cute smile. "In the meantime, we will have to postpone our plans in your hut until I return," Reyes added. Gagara giggled. "I'll be waiting and anticipating." "Just one more thing," Reyes commented. "And what would that be, handsome?" Gagara asked. "Where in the city is this Tapster's Alley?"